Ladies and gentlemen, when history calls, only the courageous respond. In an age where many African leaders have chosen silence in the face of injustice and submission in the presence of foreign domination, there rises a young man, not born of comfort, but of conviction. A son of Africa, a soldier not just by uniform, but by purpose. A man who has refused to bow before the modern day pharaohs and has instead stood tall, unflinching and unshaken. Today, we gather not merely to celebrate a man, but to recognize a movement. A movement that has declared Africa will no longer be a playground for foreign puppeteers. A movement that is echoing across the continent, from the soil of Ouagadougou to the minds of the youth in Lagos, Nairobi, and Johannesburg. He is not driven by power, but by principle. He does not speak to please the West, but to awaken the East, the North, the South, and the soul of Africa. He is young in age, but ancient in wisdom. He has chosen the path of Sankara, the resolve of Nkrumah, and the fire of Lumumba. And so, I invite you to listen not with your ears alone, but with your conscience. Let these words not entertain you, but ignite you, for what you are about to hear is not simply a speech, it is a call to rise, a call to reclaim, a call to remember that Africa's destiny lies not in Brussels, Washington, or Paris, but in the hands of her own sons and daughters. Let us now walk with the spirit of resistance. Let us now learn from the bold heart of Burkina Faso. Let us now listen to the example of a revolutionary who has reminded us all Africa is not a victim. Africa is a lion that has been disturbed. Africa has never lacked heroes. From the pyramids of Kemet to the battlefields of liberation, we have always produced men and women whose spirits refused to be broken. Yet in recent decades, it seemed as though the fire had dimmed. The voices were softer, the fists had unclenched, the continent rich in minerals and mines had been robbed of its courage. But then a lion rose in the land of Thomas Sankara, a young man not corrupted by comfort, not restrained by fear. A soldier of discipline and vision, a leader not chosen by foreign masters, but by the urgency of the moment. His name is Ibrahim Traoré. He did not walk into power through vanity or political puppetry. He marched into leadership because the people were tired of betrayal, tired of leaders who flew abroad for instructions and returned only with debts and destruction, tired of seeing their sons die fighting terrorists backed by the very hands that offered them aid. When Traoré stood up, he did not promise luxury. He promised liberation, and he kept his word. What struck the world was not just that he was young. It was that he was awake to the deception of foreign military bases dressed as peacekeepers, awake to the trickery of aid that comes with chains, awake to the reality that Burkina Faso was bleeding not from war alone, but from betrayal within. He stepped forward with clarity and declared, "Our land, our laws, our people, our power." And in doing so, he woke up the spirit of Sankara not in whispers, but in thunder. In a continent where many rise to rule but forget to serve, Traoré broke the mold. He refused luxury cars and presidential palaces. He chose a military uniform over imported suits. He did not speak from gold podiums, but from the heart of his people, and the people responded, not with applause, but with allegiance, because for the first time in decades they saw themselves in power. Not an elite, not an impostor, but one of their own, a son of the soil who remembered the pain of the people and carried the dignity of the land. The world watched in disbelief. How could a man so young speak with such resolve? How could he dismantle decades of manipulation in months? How could he expose the lie that Africa must always be patient while it is being plundered? But the answer was simple. He did not operate on fear. He moved with purpose. He did not serve two masters. He served one mission: African freedom. He removed the French boots from his soil, not because he hated France, but because he loved his people more. He rejected deals that enslaved his economy because he believed that dignity cannot be imported. It must be claimed, and when they told him he was isolated, he smiled, because he understood that true independence begins in solitude, and that sometimes walking alone is the only way to lead others to walk proud. And now his footsteps echo far beyond Burkina Faso. In Senegal, young men whisper his name as they challenge outdated regimes. In Nigeria, women draw courage from his speeches as they demand accountability. In Congo, farmers and teachers alike invoke his spirit as they dream again of an Africa that feeds itself, defends itself, and governs itself. Ibrahim Traoré has become more than a leader. He is now a mirror, and in that mirror millions of Africans are seeing themselves with new eyes. But let it be clear, this rise was not an accident. It was the result of a continent pushed to the edge, a people whose patience had expired, and a generation that refuses to inherit silence. Traoré did not wake the revolution, he joined it, and in doing so, he reminded the rest of Africa that the time for waiting is over. That youth is not a weakness, it is a weapon. That leadership does not require gray hair, but clear eyes and clean hands. This is only the beginning, because when one man stands, it invites others to rise. When one soldier refuses to kneel, an entire generation remembers how to walk. Traoré's courage has ripped the curtain of colonial comfort and revealed the ugly truth of exploitation, and that truth cannot be unseen. The question now is not whether Africa will rise. It is who will rise next. And for those still doubting, look to Burkina Faso not as a footnote of history, but as a headline of hope. Because when a lion roars in West Africa, the whole continent remembers it was never meant to crawl. There comes a time in the life of every nation when it must confront the lies it has been fed and rise to claim its own truth. That moment came for Burkina Faso when a young soldier chose to defy the puppeteers pulling the strings of Africa's fate from distant capitals. Ibrahim Traoré did not inherit a throne of gold. He inherited a battlefield soaked in the blood of betrayal, surrounded by foreign soldiers masquerading as peacekeepers, and strangled by economic leashes hidden behind diplomatic smiles. And yet, in the face of this suffocating grip, he chose defiance. He chose to tear the mask off neo-colonialism and say what others only dared to whisper. Africa is not free until its enemies are named and removed. For too long, our nations have been tricked into believing that those who exploit us are our saviors. They come with promises of protection, but leave with our uranium, our gold, our dignity. They speak the language of development while building nothing but dependency, and they offer aid only after stealing 10 times its value. But Traoré saw through the illusion. He called it what it was. He understood that foreign troops stationed on African soil were not protectors. They were occupiers. He saw that the military bases were not about peace. They were about presence, control, surveillance. They were symbols of subjugation, and so he did what few dared to do. He told them to leave. They said it was reckless. They said it was dangerous. They said Burkina Faso could not survive without its masters, but they forgot one thing. Freedom is never given, it is taken, and Traoré took it without apology. He expelled those who wore foreign flags but bled African soil. He refused to bow to the pressure of sanctions and blackmail. He dared to lead from the front, not from the shadows of colonial capitals, and in doing so, he lit a fire across the continent. But his fight was not just against soldiers. It was against systems, the NGO that dictate policy while pretending to help, the multinational corporations that sign deals behind closed doors and rob entire generations of wealth, the financial institutions that lend us our own money with interest rates that murder dreams. He knew that neocolonialism wears many faces, military, economic, and political, and he challenged them all, not with weapons, but with the weapon of truth, with the fire of conviction, with the authority of legitimacy granted by the people, not by embassies. They tried to silence him, they tried to isolate him, they tried to paint him as extreme, but what they could not erase was the mirror he held to their hypocrisy. They said he was anti-West. No, he was pro-Africa. They said he was a threat. No, he was a reminder that Africa was never meant to be ruled from outside, a reminder that the land beneath our feet belongs to us, not to those who draw borders from the sky. And what happened when he said no? Did the nation collapse? No. The people rose. Did the economy die? No. It began to breathe its first free breath. Did chaos erupt? No. Dignity returned. Because the truth is, the greatest lie ever told to Africa is that she cannot survive without her chains. But Traore showed us otherwise. He rejected aid wrapped in poison. He said no to partnerships where one party always loses. He refused to be a manager of poverty. He chose to be a steward of sovereignty. This act of defiance was not just symbolic. It was surgical, it was deliberate, and it sent a signal that shook the global order. Other nations took notice. Other leaders felt the weight of conscience. And the youth stood taller, because someone had finally spoken what they had always known. Africa is not a playground. Africa is a battlefield of ideas, and the side of freedom must now win. Ibrahim Traore may have raised a flag in Burkina Faso, but its colors now wave across borders. His courage has become contagious. His vision has become a blueprint. His refusal to be a puppet has become a permission slip for others to cut the strings. He has reminded us all that no foreign power will respect Africa until Africa respects itself enough to say no and mean it. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to be controlled. In every generation, a leader emerges, not because he seeks power, but because the people need a voice that speaks their pain, their dreams, their truth. Ibrahim Traore is not just a president. He is a reflection, a mirror of the people. He does not stand above them, he walks among them. He does not speak down to them, he listens, then answers with action. He does not rule through fear or distance, he governs through presence, simplicity, and purpose. In a continent where leadership has too often meant detachment, here stands a man who has redefined power by reclaiming proximity. And that is where his true strength lies, not in weapons or wealth, but in oneness with the people he serves. When the world sees Ibrahim Traore in a plain military uniform, they misunderstand. They think it is a costume. But to his people it is a covenant. It is a reminder that he remains one of them, shoulder to shoulder, not thrown above. He does not barricade himself in palaces. He sits in community halls, in village circles, on the dusty grounds where children play barefoot. He is not driven by protocol, but by presence. He speaks the language of the streets and echoes the silence of the poor. When they cry, he hears. When they rise, he rises with them. That is the leadership Africa has longed for. Not rulers who fly over their nations in private jets while children walk miles for water, but leaders whose boots touch the same earth as their people. He did not need to promise change. He became the change. He reduced the extravagance of office and redirected resources to where they were needed most: security, health, agriculture, education, and not just in speeches, but in substance. He met with teachers, soldiers, farmers, mothers. He did not arrive with cameras and speeches, but with notebooks and questions, because the wise leader knows that no foreign policy matters more than feeding your people. No international summit means more than safety in your streets. No handshake abroad outweighs a lifted burden at home. This is not politics, this is patriotism, and it is powerful because the people are not stupid. They are simply tired of lies wrapped in manifestos, tired of smiles that vanish after elections, tired of elites who speak of the masses but live far from them, Traore changed that equation. He looked at the people and said, "You are the state, not the flag, not the military, not the government, the people." That shift, though silent, was seismic, because for the first time in decades the people began to see a future that looked like them, not imported, not imposed, but inspired by their own dignity. But Traore's vision was never limited to borders. He did not see Burkina Faso as an island, but as a spark in a continental fire. He saw the pain of Mali, the struggle of Guinea, the unrest in Niger, the anxiety in Sudan, and said, "We are not many nations. We are one people fighting the same enemy." Colonialism may have given us borders, but Pan-Africanism gives us purpose. And so he extended his hand to fellow nations, not for photo opportunities, but to forge a front, a united West Africa that no longer begs but builds, that no longer borrows but believes in itself. This unity is not theoretical, it is practical. He called for shared intelligence against terrorism, joint defense strategies, regional trade that bypasses exploiters, cultural respect across languages and faiths. He reawakened the Sankara spirit, not through nostalgia, but through necessity, because he knew, and we must all know, that Africa will not be respected until it respects itself as a family, no tribe, no tongue. No flag is greater than the freedom of the continent. That is why the youth rally behind him, not just in Burkina Faso, but across the continent, because young Africans are not just hungry for food, they are hungry for dignity. They are tired of being told to wait, tired of being told they are the future while their present is stolen. Traore gave them something no billionaire, no Ngo, no foreign aid ever could. He gave them a reason to believe. That a young African can lead with principle, that power can come with humility, that one voice can break centuries of silence. He became a symbol not by design but by example, not by shouting louder but by standing firmer. He reminded us that the role of leadership is not to shine, but to light the path for others. And as more young people see him, they begin to see themselves, not as statistics, not as migrants, not as victims, but as architects of Africa's destiny. And that, my friends, is a revolution deeper than politics. It is a revolution of identity. Because when a leader walks with his people, the whole nation learns to run toward its freedom. There comes a moment when a single act of courage becomes a signal for 1,000 more. Ibrahim Traore did not rise alone. He rose as the echo of centuries of African resistance, and in his footsteps a new call is being heard, a call that transcends borders, a call that is louder than fear, stronger than oppression, and more powerful than any bullet. It is a call to the African youth, a call to a generation that has grown tired of watching the continent bleed while foreign hands clap in approval, a call to stop waiting and start rising. And Traore's voice in this new era is not just a message, it is a spark. For too long, African leadership has been defined by compromise, by fear of backlash, by borrowed ideas in foreign languages. But this young man stood up and shattered the myth that African leaders must kneel before global powers to be accepted. He showed that it is possible to lead without asking permission. He showed that it is possible to protect one's people without begging for validation. He showed that it is possible to govern with a spine, not with a script. And that example, that living proof of resistance and purpose, has now begun to awaken others. Today, young Africans from Accra to Addis, from Bamako to Bujumbura, are beginning to believe that the chains around their minds are weaker than they seemed. They are beginning to see that they are not cursed to repeat the failures of the past, but chosen to rewrite the future. They are beginning to realize that the greatest weapon in this war for Africa is not the gun, it is the mind. And it is the will to think boldly, to act fearlessly, to serve selflessly, and to dream unapologetically. Traore didn't just command a nation, he unlocked a movement. But this movement is not about one man. It is not about Burkina Faso alone. It is about the awakening of a continent long denied its dignity, and that awakening demands a new kind of leader, not one who sees office as a throne, but one who sees it as a duty. Not one who reads speeches written abroad, but one who speaks the language of the land and the pain of its people. Not one who builds mansions behind gates, but one who builds schools behind promises. Not one who signs away resources for loans, but one who defends them like the sacred treasures they are. This kind of leadership cannot be taught in the lecture halls of colonial institutions. It must be born in the fire of struggle, in the silence of poverty, in the cries of mothers who bury sons in soil stolen by corporations. It must be cultivated in truth, sharpened by accountability, and driven by love, not for applause, but for Africa. Traore has shown that when you stand for your people, they will stand for you. And when you stand against exploitation, you will not stand alone. In this Pan-African fire, we are witnessing the rise of a new doctrine, not of diplomacy built on begging, but of dignity built on justice. A doctrine that says African problems must have African solutions, that African soil must remain in African hands, that African gold, oil, land, and labor are not bargaining chips, they are the birthright of future generations. And that no amount of aid can replace the wealth that is stolen each day through silence and surrender. What Traore ignited is not a rebellion, it is a renaissance, a rebirth of pride, a refusal to be puppets. A declaration that Africa's time is not tomorrow, it is now, and it must be led by those who are not afraid to bleed if it means their people will heal. Those who are not afraid to die if it means their children will live free. Those who are not afraid to be called radicals if it means their nation will be called sovereign. This is the hour of transformation, and every young African must ask, will I be a spectator or a soldier of change? Will I inherit the silence of the past or the roar of this moment? Will I complain about corrupt leaders, or will I become the leader I have been praying for? Because if Ibrahim Traore has taught us anything, it is that the most dangerous person to the oppressor is the African who knows who he is, knows what he must do, and is willing to pay the price for freedom.